all the data you give to Google is not third-party data, it's first-party data.
Mm.
So when Google says we're going to get rid of all these different companies that provide different ways of tracking users across Google, what they're essentially saying is that there's only going to be one company left, and that will be Google. And so they just sealed like a massive monopoly position, which is crazy,
Wow.
right? So people they've then had to roll back on that a lot, and it's now, a big current debate about how Google are going to manage the third-party cookies, because it's something that gets dressed up as something, okay, that's very privacy focused, well done Google, but in actual fact, they just massively sealed their own market position.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
But I think what's important to understand is why is data so valuable, right? And
Yeah.
I think because even, for example, when you go to war, when you go into battle, the first thing you want to do, right, is collect data on your opponent. Even
Correct. Yeah.
like boxing, well, they have an opponent, they'll watch all his previous fights and say, oh, when this happens, he reacts like this. When that happens, he reacts like that. And then they'll prepare with that data. They'll be able to, have a plan to get a certain outcome, right?
Yeah.
And I think even for businesses, it's extremely valuable, right?
Yeah.
Not just, as we said, for advertisement, but also for their internal work, right? Businesses collect data for their own training and stuff like that. If you lose your data, if a business loses its data, it essentially goes out of business. You can't run if it doesn't go out of data. So yeah, data is essentially the foundation block of basically how we all operate, even governments, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's why data is so important, and we need to be aware of it. And we're talking about governments, we're talking about businesses, but it's also the individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to a friend, right? He's asking me why I don't have TikTok, and I told him, I don't want them to steal my data, right? Okay. He's like, as you were saying, like if they wanted to steal your data, they'd have it anyways, right?
Mm.
And then he was saying, if you have nothing to hide, why be worried, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have nothing to hide, why be so private?
Oof.
What's your thought on that?
Okay, well, you touched on a few things there. Like, you're totally right that these days everything seems to be based around like information, almost like the higher order value. And I think this is called something like informationalism or whatever, where it's like an economic paradigm shift. Where these days, let's say 40, 50 years ago, if you would look at like the S&P 500, you would see these kind of champions of the industrial age. You see car manufacturers, like drug manufacturers. You'd see all these things that have been associated with rising living standards because of the industrial age. And if you were to look at that same group of companies now, they're still there. Okay, still same companies or type of companies. But you're going to see a lot more information network providers, cloud computing providers like Amazon and Google and things like that. Probably, the more valuable ones. But when you look at the car companies, they don't own any like industrial assets anymore, or not as many, as little as possible. In fact, they kind of outsource as much of that to kind of cheaper economies. What they actually own is the patents, and patents are information assets. So they own the marketing, and they don't even kind of want to sell the car to you for cash anymore. They'd way rather you buy it on finance, because finance is worth a lot more. They can, essentially become like a bank. They can start playing with their balance sheets and playing all these other games. Finance is like an information asset as well. So finance has had this incredible last 40 years of growth, specifically emboldened and empowered by information networks, which Yanis Varoufakis was talking about a lot, wasn't he? And so you start to see, it's the same with, for example, the drug companies. They will do as much innovation as possible so that they can get that patent, and then they'll just rinse that kind of intellectual property for as long as possible, basically. And so you start to see that all the kind of economy is organized around information. I thought it was interesting how you're talking about fighters, like analyzing other fighters before a fight. What you're talking about there is behavioral insights. You literally described behavioral insights. Okay, how does someone react when you throw, them a curveball? The reason why these platforms, specifically social media, are so valuable, and the more you spend time on there, is that they're learning about you, your reactions, how long you linger on certain videos around certain topics, and they're labeling all of that. They're putting it into a database. They're building this picture of you using AI, machine learning models, and they can start to get a picture of like what makes you angry, what makes you happy, what makes you sentimental, things like that, based on your behavior, and what makes you engage, basically. So the data is, it's only as worth worth as much as like the ones and zeros. It's the behavioral insights that they can glean from that, and then they kind of convert that into marketing spend or whatever. So there's like a kind of cynical phrase from someone that worked at Google, at Facebook. He said, "Angry people click more."
Angry, okay.
So they were optimizing the algorithms that increasingly people are starting to look at, especially considering the political conversation these days. We're trying to look at the role that an algorithm actually plays in guiding the outcomes of a conversation online around a certain topic. So you've got some people who are pro, perhaps some people who are anti, but then you've got this third party there who are mediating, how these people are talking to each other and things like that. And that's increasingly becoming the most relevant aspect of a political discussion, how outraged people are by this, conversation. So I think, imagine if we were having a debate, one of us, and we asked, Alex to adjudicate. I think at some point the audience would get quite frustrated if Alex was really trying to get us angry at each other, right? You would want, at least for you to, it would be entertaining maybe. Maybe people would click more. but at some point you would start paying attention to the adjudicator of these conversations and say, are these guys just like optimizing the disagreement here, or are we actually trying to arrive at some sort of a conclusion? I think that's happening now slowly. But it's certainly had its effect on politics. As for, if you've got anything to hide, I would think we were talking a little bit before we went on air, like, if you want to talk about privacy in the practical sense, forget about it. Forget about it. It's gone. It's gone. Like, I think the earliest records of like privacy regulation are actually in the Torah, like ancient kind of like Jewish times, where they said if you're living with your neighbors facing a courtyard, and it's a hot day and you want to air out your house, then you should take turns in opening your front windows to air out your house so that you can't like look into each other's houses at the same time. And they reckon, anyway, random story, but they think that's like one of the earliest kind of privacy regulations.
Oh, wow. That's
fascinating. It's like an early kind of concept of privacy. But like, if you're someone of, if you're a political, a really controversial political figure, if you're someone like Donald Trump or Edward Snowden or one of these figures, like, I think, forget about it. Like, the government or whoever, now probably private intelligence services as well, if they want to find something out about you and publish it, they can. So in practical senses, I don't think joining a data union is actually going to solve that. You probably have your privacy and your anonymity, right? But it's a lot more about whether we have privacy as a political, economic concept still, okay? And you kind of touched on this when you were talking about how profound and revolutionary the idea of getting paid for your data is. It really is. Like, there's the tangible, there's the more practical entrepreneurial side of this business, getting people, a bit better deals in supermarkets, giving people control, things like that, pushing out features. I can't wait for all of that. But at the same time, it's so unbelievably profound when you consider data as labor, perhaps. It's kind of like we're doing a digital labor movement, okay? And if you look at a lot of the kind of challenges that we have in our society right now, we've kind of already been through it, okay? And Yanis Varoufakis touches on this when he's talking about the kind of economic situation we live in right now is closer to techno-feudalism. It's not like a capitalist society that we live in anymore. We live in something closer to techno-feudalism, where everybody kind of works in these platforms that own huge chunks of the land, the digital land, and we kind of get what they give us, but whatever, like, we don't get paid a wage for the work that we do there. In the early days of the Industrial Revolution, we got out the kind of feudal times, but for the first 40 years, there wasn't that much increase in wages, okay? And there wasn't actually that much increase in national productivity levels. It was only after the labor movement, which actually negotiated the national minimum wage and negotiated the middle class, that you start to get these like continuous process of innovation. You get this massive, a completely novel thing for society is called like a stable property owning middle class. Massive market to sell to. It was like hugely beneficial for economies, really like great for productivity. And we kind of have this concept of trade unions these days of how they were in the twilight of the industrial age, when they were defending territory in the 80s and deindustrialization and things like that. But if you look at how they functioned in the early days, they totally transformed the economy. And so trade unions and collective bargaining are pretty much the only aspect of the economy that hasn't yet been digitalized.
So this seems not inevitable, but let's say necessary.
Necessary. It's super necessary.
Yeah. I think the idea is like data syndicalism. You know, you're giving data is going back to the people, and it's honestly so exciting to see this happen in real time, and you being such a big part of it. How does it feel? How does it feel to be part of this movement?
Hey man, like it's been really cool to join this industry body of other data unions and talk to different people. The feeling is very much that, you know, the real enemies are enemies, whatever. Yeah, but like, you know, the real people that we're trying to disrupt is the big tech companies. So there's a really good spirit right now of like an industry trade body where we're all helping each other petition regulators and make sure that even though we have these regulations which are enabling us to request data for our members, unfortunately, a lot of these companies are just kind of ignoring them, just thinking these guys are going to run out of funding before or whatever, or we'll just deal with this in court because we've got more money than them. But there's a really nice collective spirit about that. So a guy called Tom Fish is heading up that. I think he used to work in the CMA, I believe. And it's called Code, this kind of industry body that we're all contributing to. And so it's been really great to touch base and network with other people and all the different kind of ways that you can take this concept of paying people directly for their data, you know, like with Rodeo, helping gig economy workers. It doesn't really touch on what we're doing. It's just fascinating to see and hear how they're doing it and how we can help. And we're sharing kind of secrets about what we're doing, what our tech stack is looking at, how we're trying to get around or how we interpret the regulations and things like that. And yeah, so it's an exciting time to be like right on the precipice of this new industry. It certainly feels like the EU wants it to work, and you know they have every incentive to make it work. And the public seem to really want companies like this. It's something I think in the back of everyone's head. The data problem has been, you know, it's been freaking us out kind of a little bit. It's something we don't understand, but we know it's getting more and more important. How do I solve this problem? It would be an absolute pleasure to be involved in helping people actually get their head around it and take it a little bit of control.